The Anatomy of Pistis, Reevaluating Faith, Faithfulness, and Allegiance in Early Christian and Jewish Contexts. Introduction. In New Testament and early Christian theology, few terms carry greater weight than the Greek noun pistis and its cognate verb pistuo. Traditionally rendered faith or belief, pistis anchors Pauline soteriology and the doctrine of justification. Yet historical, linguistic, and sociological scholarship shows that limiting the term to mere belief truncates its full semantic range and misrepresents what the biblical authors intended. Within Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s Promise Plan framework, pistis belongs to the single, organically unfolding divine purpose. This purpose reverses the fractures of the three cosmic rebellions, Eden, the Watchers, and Babel. It restores humanity's royal priestly vocation as the image of God within the cosmic temple, and it preserves the concrete promises to ethnic Israel within the one people of God. While this essay critiques certain reductions in post-Reformation interpretation, it acknowledges the enduring contributions of scholars such as Martin Luther, Rudolf Bultmann, Douglas Moo, and Thomas Schreiner. These interpreters rightly emphasize pistis as trust or belief grounded in God's promise. They caution that expanding pistis to include allegiance risks conflating justification with sanctification. Nevertheless, modern Western individualism has often reduced faith to mere intellectual assent or an irrational Kierkegaardian leap. In the ancient Mediterranean world, pistis encompassed reliability, confidence, assurance, fidelity, faithfulness, commitment, and pledged loyalty. This essay argues that biblical pistis is best understood holistically as allegiance or covenantal fidelity. Analysis across Greco-Roman, Second Temple Jewish, Old Testament, and Pauline contexts shows that saving pistis is not opposed to works or obedience. Instead, it is a comprehensive posture of intellectual agreement, public confession, and embodied loyalty to Jesus as the enthroned Lord. The inadequacy of the traditional belief paradigm. Contemporary usage frequently opposes faith to reason. Philosophical traditions influenced by Kierkegaard portray it as a blind leap. Biblical pistis, by contrast, is a reasonable, action-oriented response grounded in the conviction that God's unseen realities are more certain than the visible ones, as Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 declares. This conviction propelled Noah and Abraham to decisive obedience. The classic Protestant faith versus works dichotomy, while pastorally helpful in guarding grace, has sometimes imposed a false binary. Scholars such as Matthew Bates and Mark Nanos argue persuasively that pistis often denotes faithfulness or allegiance, inherently requiring embodied response. Saving pistis is thus a holistic life orientation rather than a purely cognitive transaction. The socio-political and linguistic matrix of pistis. The case for allegiance rests on the usage of pistis in its original context. In the Greco-Roman world, pistis and the Latin fides denoted loyalty within patron-client systems and in response to imperial demands. Roman propaganda employed the language of euangelion and kyrios for emperors. Therefore, the early Christian confession, Jesus is Lord, was profoundly subversive, as Revelation chapter 2 verse 13 highlights. Methodological caution is necessary. These socio-political models illuminate cultural connotations without implying that the New Testament authors simply adopted Roman categories. They enrich rather than replace the distinct covenantal nuances of Jewish and Christian texts. Second Temple Jewish literature reinforces connotations of loyalty. Jewish usage, however, frames pistis primarily as covenant fidelity rooted in God's character and Torah. This distinguishes it from more transactional Greco-Roman applications. Early Christians transformed this language to express allegiance to Jesus as the fulfillment of Israel's story and Lord over all rival powers. The Old Testament foundation, emunah and Abraham. Pauline pistis draws on the Hebrew emunah, meaning steadfastness or trustworthiness, which the Septuagint frequently renders as pistis. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 4, the righteous shall live by his emunah or pistis, is pivotal as quoted in Romans chapter 1, verse 17 and Galatians chapter 3, verse 11. Abraham exemplifies this. Paul anchors justification in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, as discussed in Romans chapter 4 and Galatians chapter 3. Abraham's specific trust in God's life-giving promise inaugurates the trans-ethnic expansion of the Promise Plan. Gentiles become spiritual descendants through union with Christ, the singular seed. At the same time, concrete promises to ethnic Israel remain, as Romans chapter 11 verses 25 through 29 affirms. This pistis thus advances the restoration of sacred space within the cosmic temple, the tripartite anatomy of saving pistis. Saving pistis comprises three interrelated components. First, intellectual agreement or mental assent, cognitive affirmation of the gospel, Jesus' incarnation, atoning death, resurrection, and enthronement, as seen in John chapter 2 verse 11, John chapter 20 verse 31, and Romans chapter 4 verses 23 through 25. Second, confession of loyalty, public declaration, often baptismal. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, as Romans chapter 10 verse 9 states. Third, embodied fidelity or enacted loyalty, the obedience of faith, hypoko pistios, in Romans chapter 1 verse 5 and chapter 16 verse 26. Paul links obedience to final salvation, as in Galatians chapter 5 verses 19 through 21, Romans chapter 2 verse 6, John chapter 3 verse 36, and James chapter 2 verses 17 and 26. Resolving the tension, faith versus works. Pistis understood as allegiance resolves the tension. Paul opposes not good works, but works of the law, ergonomo, ethnic boundary markers such as circumcision. The new perspective helpfully highlights these dynamics. The Promise Plan framework integrates them by locating justification in covenantal allegiance to the Messiah. Spirit-empowered union with Christ produces good works as organic fruit. This understanding has clear implications for contemporary practice. Churches are encouraged to pursue holistic discipleship that integrates belief, confession, and embodied loyalty. The Pistis Christo debate and the righteousness of God. The Pistis Christo debate supports both objective, faith in Christ, and subjective, faithfulness of Christ, readings. Jesus' perfect obedience unto death secures redemption and is vindicated in resurrection, ek pisteos eis pistin, from faith to faith, as Romans chapter 1 verse 17 puts it. Believers' allegiance incorporates them into Christ, deriving righteousness through union with the righteous head. This honors Reformed emphases on trust while recovering fuller covenantal dimensions. Conclusion. Pistis resists reduction to modern belief or blind faith. Rooted in Greco-Roman sociopolitics and Second Temple covenant theology, it denotes comprehensive allegiance, loyalty, and fidelity. Saving Pistis engages mind, mouth, and body in loyal response to King Jesus. This holistic vision unites faith and works, grace and obedience, within the Promise Plan's organic architecture. It restores humanity's royal priestly vocation in the cosmic temple, grafts Gentiles into Israel's root, and preserves Israel's concrete promises in Romans chapter 11. The eschatological people of God, Jew and Gentile together, are marked by lived allegiance to the Messiah who faithfully loved them and gave himself for them, advancing the full restoration of sacred space until heaven and earth unite under his reign.